Today, we are honored to host one of the world's foremost experts on nuclear strategy and South Asian security, Dr. Petr Topychanov. Dr. Topychkanov is a senior researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, where he focuses on nuclear disarmament, strategic stability, particularly in South Asia. He has previously worked at the Carnegie Moscow Center and the Russian Academy of Sciences and is well known for his extensive research on India and Pakistan's nuclear doctrines, missile developments, and crisis behavior. His insights are widely respected by policymakers and academics alike. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into the strategic dynamics of the May 2025 India Pakistan conflict, focusing on nuclear posturing, missile exchanges, drone warfare, and the evolving role of technology in crisis escalation and deterrence. So, hi, Peter, how are you? Very interesting times.
Oh, yes. Hello, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. It's not just interesting time; it's dramatic time.
Dramatic times.
A lot of
So, Peter,
events and a lot of lessons.
yeah, Dr. Peter, so what do you think overall as to what has happened seeing from Moscow? How concerned are you as to what has happened?
I guess you mean the events between India and Pakistan.
Yes.
So let me give you just the first and most obvious for me following these events from Moscow, the perspective of the Eurasian security space. India and Pakistan joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, something that Russia and China built carefully to create the environment, so titled the Shanghai Spirit, in the Eurasian space. And initially, it was Russia, China, Central Asian republics. Now we have also India, Pakistan, Iran, Belarus, and other countries. And now what we have? We have something, not just some small conflicts, for instance, between Central Asian republics about borders between them. Of course, with some casualties, but it's all manageable. Now we have something much bigger. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was silent. Of course, it doesn't have any mandate to to make peace or to convince member states to negotiate peace between them. But it has a capacity to provide a good framework. And it was just silent. It was non-existent. For me, what happened? It torpedoed the efforts of Russia and China to build a joint security environment in Eurasia, together with India and Pakistan. It's something that, from my perspective, following these events from Moscow. Of course, for you, probably, it's not the most significant outcome of this conflict, especially because probably it's not over. We just followed the speech by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who made very serious statements, probably to calm down the audience, probably to send a strong message to Pakistan that it's not over. So that is why I will just after this my first statement about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The next, I hope, we will discuss
Yeah.
the regional events.
Dr. Peter, let's start with the role of missiles and strategic deterrence, right? How did the deployment of, long-range ballistic and cruise missiles, and I know you are an expert on this, such as, India used Rafale, Scalp missiles, for example, BrahMos in this, something which you and I had been talking about for a long time, and Pakistan did deploy. Although had Shaheen and Abdal and Baburs, but how did it shape the deterrence posture and war fighting calculus during this conflict? And I'll take you at a point where Pakistan, while India has used BrahMos, Pakistan has used Fateh 1 and 2. What's your take on this?
Previously, when we discussed together the approach, for instance, that Pakistan has, we focused on the fact that Pakistan doesn't differentiate tactical and strategic nuclear weapons. For Pakistan, tactical and strategic, they are all strategic weapons. And it was true, it was clear, and it's still very relevant. But what we could see during this crisis, that it's not just about nuclear weapons. In the end of your question, you mentioned that the question about the effect for nuclear deterrence. And when the exchange happened between India and Pakistan, I read many comments from both Pakistan and India that the nuclear deterrence was restored. And these exchanges were with conventional means, with cruise missiles, with short-range missiles, with launch missiles, with drones, and so on. But still, for many experts in your region, in your country, and some experts in India, it wasn't just about conventional exchanges. It was about restoring nuclear deterrence with conventional means. And for me, it means that these conventional capabilities started during this crisis playing strategic role. And it means that in the future, we could see that both India and Pakistan, in different scale and in different sense, will use these strategic conventional capabilities is something to ensure nuclear deterrence and to deter or to target, just in case, strategic capabilities of each other. It's quite dangerous because it becomes a difference between not just strategic and tactical nuclear weapons, but the difference between nuclear weapons and conventional systems, including of short range, including cruise missiles, just it's non-existent. And that is why the situation in future may be more fragile and more fragile and less predictable in terms of possible escalations.
Yeah, Peter,
Also,
yeah, sure, just go on.
yeah, yes,
Go on,
please, yes,
go
please.
on, go on, go on, go on.
Yeah. Also, what was for me, I'll say, what was easy about the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War time? We used to consider each other as equal adversaries. And the United States considered the Soviet Union as a great power, responsible great power, with significant and predictable nuclear capabilities and policies. And the same approach existed in the Soviet Union. This approach, of course, eroded after the Soviet Union collapse. But now it's back to the reality, and we could see, by example, of the indirect conversations between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. But
Yeah.
unfortunately for your region, it's not the case. And even in the statement by Narendra Modi, we could see that India approaches Pakistan as something very different from the reality, not as an equal adversary having significant or equal nuclear capability and also effective conventional capabilities, but something irresponsible, something ineffective, something not in control of its own territories and the groups and so on and so forth. Just follow the speech by Narendra Modi.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all
So,
obvious there.
Peter, Russians was
And
the
it's very
Russians. Who,
dangerous.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
was the Russians who provided BrahMos. It's a Russian engine in it. How do you see the deployment of BrahMos against Pakistan? So what I've seen is that somehow that BrahMos, apparently India used its the best weapon against Pakistan. BrahMos, it's used not once, but I think they've used it about 4 times in Pakistan. And retaliation by Pakistan came from a Fateh, which is an entry level missile, not to the top notch where we had Babar or anything. What's your analysis on this?
First of all, what I want to say, we are existing in the cloud of war. Happily, it wasn't actual a war, but still, I didn't see, and of course, you know it's much better than me, such level of state propaganda and fakes in mass media, including in mass media, quite serious top level mass media in India and Pakistan. That is why, for me, it's difficult to assess correctly the cases of using these capabilities. Including, I do remember that in Pakistan there were reports about Pakistan hit the storage of BrahMos missiles as well.
So no, my question is,
But
what's your
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but back to the question. Because I participated in many discussions before in Pakistan, I heard these concerns many years ago, before the time when India and Russia agreed to develop BrahMos with extended range. Even before that, Pakistani experts, including in public, highlighted their concerns about Russian supplied BrahMos. Also, the same existed about S-400. Well, for Russia, it was something that Russia supplied in hope that it would be a weapon of not
Deterrence.
sorry, it would be weapons, I mean, BrahMos and S-400, rather than weapons of war fighting. And to be honest, for me, it looks like Moscow was somehow. I'm sorry,
No,
just
no
it's
problems.
my
It would be
it's
gone
my
off. No
yeah.
problems.
Yeah, and so somehow Moscow was a little bit naive supplying the systems. I don't mean that Moscow shouldn't supply them. Moscow maybe needed agree some kind of rules
But
just to be
yeah,
more transparent and more helpful for the regional stability. But in the same way, I just want to highlight that simultaneously Moscow supplied systems and technologies used together by Pakistan and China in developing their own systems, such as JF using the Russian engine in its first modifications.
so but Peter, so your analysis of India using BrahMos, effectively into Pakistan, it really penetrated into Pakistan, hit some of our air bases in Pakistan, and Pakistan's retaliation apparently by Fateh. So my was did the Indians use its full throttle by using BrahMos, and Pakistan used the entry level missiles with Fateh? Why didn't Pakistan respond with Babar or anything? What's your analysis on this?
Why Pakistan didn't respond?
Yeah, didn't use Babar or Shaheens and everything which they had, where the Russians use Bahamos, right? Which the so with the Indians using Bahamos.
Okay. Yeah, it's very 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 clear for me. When Russia and India agreed to develop the BrahMos technology, it was agreed initially and then reconfirmed many times that BrahMos will be kept conventional. So that is why even for Pakistani military, it's clear that if BrahMos is detected flying in the direction of Pakistan, it's a conventional threat, not a nuclear one.
And supersonic
This,
is
yes, supersonic is fine, but it's conventional. The most
yeah.
important is it's conventional. It's not about a nuclear capability. Just a second, sorry. It's quite cold now in
Oh,
Moscow.
okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, but as for
No problem.
Shaheen, as for Babur, as for Nasser, it's all clear that some of them are dual capable, some of them just nuclear capable systems. That is why for this kind of scenarios, it could be considered by India as a potential nuclear threat. So
Okay.
that is why in the situation of ongoing conflict and a lot of fakes, a lot of misinformation from both sides, a detection of a flying Shaheen or Babur or Nasser could provoke further and very quick escalation in this conflict.
Yeah. Now, so let's go on to another question about we've used, obviously, we've seen air defense and drone warfare in this conflict. This conflict was witnessed. We witnessed unprecedented level of aerial engagement, particularly on the domains of drones and air defense. India used the Israeli harpoons, which actually penetrated into Pakistan space, and Pakistan used a smaller, swarming drones attacking Indian military bases. What does this reveal about evolving role of UAVs into this India-Pak conflict? What's your take on this?
For me, when analyzing in our previous projects, for instance, with CIPRI, the automation and strategic stability, all these books are available online. We discussed with our contributors the role of UAVs in future conflicts, especially in disputed territories such as Kashmir. And somehow it's destabilizing, and somehow it's a stabilizing tool. Why destabilizing? Because it helps both sides to lower the threshold of use of force, because the price of a drone, especially if cheap, is much lower than a fighter with a pilot, especially in 2019. It was a very high price for India because it became a very strong propaganda tool for Pakistan. So from this point of view, it's destabilizing because it has a uh, lower level of threshold of using force during such conflict. But also, it's quite stabilizing because despite the fact that countries are easier to use these platforms during conflicts, it doesn't mean that they have a higher risk of using their troops, pilots, and military people during such conflicts. So it's more about targeting, for instance, runways, for instance, what we could see by example of India when during secondary and strikes they focused on such things, trying not to hit troops but rather installations. So it means that India and Pakistan try to establish new rules of engagement. And I don't mean the Modi and political level. I mean the military level.
Military, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, because for them it's always important to have the predictability of the further development of their engagements. That is why they try to be predictable and to control all the steps of escalation between them. So to have manageable escalation. And from this point of view, drones are very useful.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
absolutely.
useful.
Very useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's part of psychops as well. You see drones, you get scared, the voice, and it's used as psychops. So let's talk about air combat and this Chinese defense systems, which everybody's talking about. This conflict actually saw air-to-air engagement. There were reports of Pakistani shooting down at least one Rafale. They say about two, and from Chinese origin J-10s with LP-15E missiles. How do you assess this relative performance of Pakistan Air Force with the Indian Air Force in these dogfights and UAV strikes, and then we could talk about Chinese weapons in that.
Well, to be honest, I don't know how to comment that.
Yeah. So
To be
let
honest,
me rephrase this. So
because
what is the
yeah, because
significance? What, Peter? What is the Let me just. I understand your concerns. What if is the significance of a Chinese, if it's true, and everything comes forward, what is the significance of a PF J-10 Chinese with PL-15 killing in Rafael in this region? What's the significance?
why it's difficult for me to comment on this. It's not about my concerns about how my comments would be considered in this or that country. But the question is, I don't have the full picture.
Yeah, I
As I
understand.
mentioned, there are a lot of fakes, propaganda, and to be honest, open source intelligence doesn't help a lot because it's difficult to establish where is true, where is just a tool of propaganda.
And to be
And when we tried counting numbers of jets intercepted, it's maybe one, maybe two, maybe three. I don't know. Maybe five, maybe seven. I don't know. But what it's important for me? It's important for me that there was a huge lesson learned by both sides during the conflict of 2019. For India, the lesson was not to enter the airspace of Pakistan if it's not needed because it's too dangerous. And Pakistan realized that it needed to beef up its air defense. And I do remember several years ago, it was a huge question about how effective is air defense, for instance, to protect Islamabad. This question was very relevant few years ago. And what we could see during this conflict that Pakistan, with the help of China, built a lot to protect its airspace. And even not just to protect its own airspace, but to have capabilities to observe the airspace of India in the neighborhood. And not only to observe, but also to have impact on the military operations on their side.
So I've got two questions, Pete. One is, of course, if the Pakistani air defense worked, how did the drones? There's a question from people which have been asking. How did the drones penetrated into Pakistan? One, two major cities. B, of course, how did BrahMos was not intercepted by Pakistan and killed in the air?
It's a very easy question, and of course, I know that you have very bright commentators who already have the answer to this question. If air defense consists of two key elements, one of them is detecting capabilities, such as radars and computer system, and another component is interceptor. And if your first component is overwhelmed by many flying targets, such as missiles, cruise missiles, drones, you need to differentiate these targets and to hit the most dangerous. It's very difficult. It's very difficult even for very advanced countries such as Israel. Do you remember the exchanges between Israel and Iran? Do you remember the exchanges between Gaza and Israel when Israel failed to intercept a significant number of drones flying from the Gaza sector? Even from Gaza sector, just imagine, it's not a huge country, just a small piece of land. So that is why you have, in a very compressed period of time, the task not only to detect all flying stuff, but also to differentiate and to detect the most dangerous and to intercept them just in few minutes and few seconds. And so it's not possible for any country. I do remember drones targeted also Moscow, originated from Ukraine. Do you remember that a few years ago, Ukrainian drones targeted Engels in
Yeah.
Samara region with strategic capabilities deployed there? So sometimes it's difficult
And what about
for
supersonic
every advanced country.
weapons? What about supersonic weapons? Same with them, right?
Yeah, the same. What is important? It's about speed. It's about the attitude of a cruise flight. Because if the attitude is low, it means that for radars it would be a shorter time to detect. So that is why it's not the question of your system failure or mistakes. It's about just a moment when the system was very busy with many flying objects, and it's about how officers and how commanders and how computers and interceptors could manage this pressure. So the
Yeah.
same was obvious for
So I
India, the same
spoke.
was
Yeah.
obvious for
Yeah.
Israel, for Russia, and for many
Yeah,
other
so I
countries.
spoke to the PF, and they said we killed most of these drones through soft targeting, not with hard targeting. So we actually, you were right, we chose the Pakistani side chose which target to choose, which was more important. And then coming back to this and finalizing on how effective was India's multi-rate air defense system, especially S-400 and the indigenous Akash in neutralizing these. It seems that it was effective, right?
You ask me questions that I believe even Indian experts
Yeah,
cannot answer. Of course, we have so many bloggers in India
yeah.
commenting on
So, so,
these
so
capabilities.
let's
Also, we have people from defense industry uploading the effectiveness of Akash and S400. But for me, we need more time.
okay, okay.
Just we need, for instance, if you we just could for instance we could read articles with some satellite
I think about 2 3 months,
imageries.
everything would be
Yeah,
clear and everything would be good to comment on this. Yeah. So let's talk about
I hope
nuclear
so.
doctrine and strategic restraint. You see, India maintains a no first use policy while Pakistan relies on this strategic how do we say strategic ambiguity on battlefield nuclear options. How did these doctrines influence both sides' military decisions during the standoff? What's your take on that?
What I could see during this crisis, what was for me not a huge surprise, but I noticed that many officials from Pakistan commented on nuclear weapons, including those who, by their position, don't have the responsibility to deal with the nuclear weapons issues, such as Pakistani ambassador to Moscow or Minister of Railways of Pakistan. And it's some years ago the same happened to Russia when people not in charge of nuclear policy commented on these issues. It's not helpful. It's not helpful because in the time of crisis you don't understand. It's about signaling, or it's about personal statements, meaning their own sentiments, own feelings, and so on and so forth. But for me, it was, I'd say, for me, it was clear that when I read your nuclear doctrine about full spectrum deterrence, for me, it's a very clear doctrine, meaning not only a situation of battles and combat and troops engagements, but also events such as a possible limitation to access of Pakistan to waters of the Indus River. But it seemed to me that during this crisis, I have two interpretations. India first could test your doctrine and just to test your red lines. What is acceptable for Pakistan and what is not acceptable. Or India just try to ignore the doctrine and try to show that it didn't consider your doctrine as a serious document. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, it India resists consider Pakistan and its doctrine as a strategic reality in the region, So I don't know. Probably what we really need right now. We need to have some exchanges between India and Pakistan. Second track dialogue, for instance, between
Yeah,
your
but Peter,
wise men to
Prime Minister
understand
Narendra,
outcomes.
yeah,
Yeah.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi used the word nuclear bluff apparently this time, and
Yeah.
and how do you think did they, nuclear deterrence and everything, do they act as a stabilizing factor, or create added risk due to uncertainty in signaling games? Rumors also circulated about, and I'm sure because I'm told that these are rumors, that Indians missiles actually causing nuclear ideation on mountains in Pakistan, Noor Khan Air Base. And what's your sure, this is something you don't know, I don't know, and the Indians doesn't know. It happens obviously inside Pakistan. If this happened, what's your assessment on this?
So, well, it's
I'm
there is
putting you
an
on the
old
spot, I know.
conversation. Yeah, there is a very old conversation initiated by several very good scholars. One of them, Michael Crepon, who passed away just not long ago, about the paradox of stability and instability. Somehow it works right now. And so some nuclear weapons provide stability to the region, but also there are the ways to let the nuclear weapons destabilize situation in the region. So for me, it's exactly the moment when we see how nuclear weapons don't help stabilize situation, because India publicly resists consider your weapons, the nuclear weapons of Pakistan, as a strategic reality. Instead, Narendra Modi demonstrated that it's a bluff and it's not helpful. Just I do remember that I heard from some of experts in Pakistan and some of them from India the idea that India and Pakistan needed a Caribbean crisis, such as happened between Soviet Union and the United States, to start negotiating the measures to diminish nuclear risks. But for me, the problem is that you have many mini Caribbean crises, such as already happened during 2019 when a nuclear submarine Arihant was in combat patrolling during the active phase of Pulwama escalation. And the public opinion somehow even may ignore that it's happening and that nuclear risks are higher than previously. And now we have this issue discussed publicly in personal statements by people, in commanders, in political leadership, and so on. And for me, unfortunately, now we have a huge opportunity for misinterpretations and misperceptions. That is why just a few seconds ago I mentioned that probably just right now it's the right time to have second track conversations, non-public conversations between India and Pakistan wise men to discuss outcomes and how this crisis highlighted the need to have a track covering nuclear risks.
Yeah, and as we're coming to closing now, it's technological disruptions and crisis stability. Beyond missiles and drones, the conflict featured heavy use of ISR assets, satellite and drones. We have discussed electronic warfare, precision guiding emanations. How are these technologies affecting the offensive defense balance and nuclear risk, especially when, Peter, our modern air defense becoming stabilizers by denying access and deterring strikes, or are they actually attempting preemptive actions to overwhelm them? How is this war changing in this thing?
Yes, it's a very good question. And of course, I agree with you that we just need probably 3 months more to assess correctly the military force use and technologies during this crisis. But what is obvious for me, of course, it's heavy use of advanced technologies, including satellite imagery. As I want to give you an example, during the Kargil crisis in 1999 had satellite images supplied by 2 countries, and these satellite images weren't precise, of poor quality, and one country supplied images delayed. So India didn't have actual awareness about the situation in the region of conflict. Now, probably India has actual awareness of the situation on the ground. And probably Pakistan has too, especially, I don't know, it's my personal speculation. Probably if China helped Pakistan to get these images to understand what is going on. But it's my speculation. Maybe I'm wrong. But at least it's clear that Pakistan will invest more funds to develop its own military satellite constellation in orbit. It has probably only one right now, but in future it may have more with the help of China, for instance. But at the same time, in the Indian debate, it was very clear that Pakistan is considered as a country without a strategic depth and something like a country vulnerable for strikes deep inside. I know that some authors from Pakistan also repeat this argument. But new technologies from the Indian side helped India to strike deep inside, yes, but also for Pakistan, new technologies made these strikes for India much more expensive, much more difficult. So, new technologies provided Pakistan with something that Pakistan lacked in the past, this strategic depth. Because of heavy air defense, cyber means, awareness, drone capabilities, Pakistan virtually created a strategic depth that will make future confrontations between India and Pakistan more expensive.
Okay, and finally, what are the lessons learned from this, from Moscow and around the world? And my concern, especially, Peter, is that there were four terrorists who killed people in Kashmir. 26 people who were killed. Apparently, it was not just it is pure terrorism. Apparently, and for and from even Pakistanis condemned this. Apparently, India has not caught these people. We don't know where they came from. On assumptions, they've gone on a war. There's a big debate in the world. Apparently, my perspective was if India would have caught these people, brought them to justice, showed some evidence, the world would have sided with India. But what I see from this conflict is from everyone who's actually had sympathized with India, but then never stood with India as before. What's your assessment on this, and your closing remarks?
I started my conversation with my first initial thoughts about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And then I had a reference to Narendra Modi's speech when he mentioned that the only subject we are ready to discuss with Pakistan it's about terrorism. Well, you are welcome. I mean, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has a very good framework for having conversation on terrorism, regional anti-terrorism structure, locating in Central Asia with its own headquarters and trainings and so on and so forth, including exchanges of lists and intelligence data and so on and so forth. So even if India and Pakistan are not ready to discuss these issues bilaterally, Pakistan is ready. I do remember the statement by your Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif about that Pakistan is ready to be part of investigation. But still, we have a regional framework to help creating this conversation. I'm sorry, Jason.
No, thank you.
We have a regional Eurasian framework to have this conversation on terrorism. Because my concern is that without a direct exchanges between India and Pakistan about terrorism threat, about 24 to 7,
No, thank you. No.
without having 24 to 7 lines of communication between India and Pakistan about terrorism, in future, there is no guarantee that something similar won't happen. And I agree with you. I agree with you because there are so many actors interested in arranging this stuff, including not
Non-state
only
actors, yeah.
not
And
not
finally,
not, and not only from India and Pakistan, maybe from Afghanistan, maybe from Middle East, maybe from countries very far from your region.
yeah, yeah. Finally, Peter, I forgot telling you, why didn't we see a naval war between India and Pakistan or escalations? Any comment on it before you go?
Naval war. India and Pakistan have their own vulnerabilities, such as huge financial and transport hubs in Karachi, in Mumbai, in other places. That is why they have a lot to care in the naval security. That is why, and especially with new technologies to come to the sea area, such as crew-less platforms that can be used by India and by Pakistan, there are a lot of things that may happen if India and Pakistan decide to have a naval confrontation.
I
So
think
it's
that
it's it's quite dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Petr Topychanov. It's always a pleasure. We want to see you back in India and Pakistan whenever things escalate. And we think we all looked at this at a very minute level, and we pray that this region stabilize and we never even talk about deterrence or anything like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. It's always my pleasure to have conversations with you.